The three outlaws saw only a lone native girl, an easy mark for their cruel sport at the dusty Stoneford trading post. They couldn't fathom that their jeering laughter and aggressive taunts were directed at a warrior whose calm concealed a storm of deadly skill, a misjudgment that would, in moments, cost them dearly. Their every sneer, every shove, was a step closer to unleashing a truth about her they were terrifyingly unprepared to face. This encounter, beginning with their arrogant mockery, was destined to end in their blood and her silence. Her name was Kaya. She had journeyed 3 suns from the Sky Whisper lands, a people more renowned for delicate beadwork than for the sharp edge of a tomahawk. But Kaya walked a different path, a silent guardian molded by ancient teachings and the unforgiving wilderness. Her purpose in Stoneford was simple: to trade for essential supplies, salts and metal tools, before the teeth of winter bit deep into the high country, isolating her village. She moved through the clamor of Albright's trading post with an ethereal grace, a shadow amidst the rough-hewn settlers. Her dark eyes, intense and observant, missed nothing. She saw the tremor in old Mr. Albright's hands as he tallied accounts, the weary slump of the sheriff's shoulders, the way the sunlight exposed the layers of grime on the stocked shelves. These were the subtle tells of a community teetering on the edge, details that escaped most. But for Kaya, they were as clear as tracks in fresh snow. Her normal was a state of perpetual awareness, a hunter's instinct honed sharp. The pouch at her hip, the one drawing greedy eyes, held more than trinkets. It carried remedies, a carved bird from her little brother, and a spirit as unyielding as the mountains themselves. She carried the quiet burden of her people's safety, a responsibility that sharpened her senses to every shift in the wind, every flicker of aggression in a stranger's eye. Stoneford, with its raw edges and restless energy, always felt like a drawn bowstring to her. Today, that string hummed with a particularly dangerous note. The bowstring snapped with the arrival of Bart Higgins and his swaggering shadows, Rufus and Clyde. Higgins, his face a roadmap of old hatreds, slammed through the trading post door, his men flanking him like ill-omened hounds. Rufus, small and rat-like, darted nervous glances around, while Clyde, a hulking brute, moved with the mindless force of a buffalo. The reek of cheap whiskey and malevolence preceded them. Bart's gaze, cold and appraising as a winter frost, swept the room, finally snagging on Kaya. An ugly smile stretched his lips. He announced to his men, his voice a harsh grate, that they had found a little prairie flower, strayed far from her patch. Rufus snickered, a wet, unpleasant sound, and spat tobacco juice near Kaya's moccasins, remarking that she didn't look like much, hardly worth any bother. Clyde merely grunted, his dull eyes fixing on Kaya's beaded pouch. Kaya remained still, her spine straight, her gaze distant, betraying nothing of the ice that was beginning to form in her core. This was the hunter's chill, the prelude to decisive action. She had hoped for a swift trade, an unnoticed departure. That hope now lay trampled in the dust with Rufus's spittle. Mr. Albright, his face paling, attempted a feeble intervention, stammering that the gentleman should leave her be, that she was just a customer. Bart dismissed him with a contemptuous flick of his wrist, telling Albright to mind his own affairs, that they were merely being neighborly. His eyes, hard and black, drilled into Kaya. He demanded to know what was in her bag, suggesting she might have something shiny for him. He advanced, his foul breath washing over her. The air grew thick with unspoken violence. Kaya registered his stained teeth, the way his fingers twitched near the colt at his hip. He was a man who enjoyed the taste of fear in others. Bart Higgins and his men thrived on intimidation. In places like Stoneford, their brand of menace usually bought them whatever they desired. They began to move around Kaya, a slow, predatory circle, their boots scuffing the wooden floor. Rufus, his voice dripping with false charm, asked if the cat had her tongue, or if her kind didn't learn civilized speech. Clyde, emboldened, reached out a thick, dirty finger and tugged at one of her braids. Kaya's eyes narrowed, a flicker almost too quick to see. Her mind was a whirlwind of calculation. Bart, the leader, brash and overconfident, carried his peacemaker low, a large knife also visible. Rufus, jumpy, had a smaller pistol. Clyde, the muscle, seemed to rely on his fists. She absorbed these details, filing them away. The few other patrons and Albrights averted their eyes, a mixture of fear and shame coloring their faces. Mr. Albright himself looked as if he wished the earth would open and swallow him whole. No assistance would come from these quarters. This was a storm she would weather alone. Kaya finally spoke, her voice a low, steady current in the sudden quiet. She stated that she sought no trouble, her only wish to trade, and then depart. Bart let out a harsh bark of laughter, declaring that she would leave when they permitted it. First, he insisted she would make a little contribution for their valuable time. His gaze again dropped to her pouch. He offered her a choice, to let them see what treasure she was hiding, or they would find out for themselves. Kaya understood this was the precipice. To submit now would be to invite far worse. To resist would be to unleash what lay dormant within her. She made a slight, deliberate turn, a feigned consideration of her choices. Her mind, however, was already mapping the space around them, judging distances, feeling the familiar weight of the tomahawk nestled against her spine. She decided her best course was to move towards the door, to draw them out, away from the confined space and the frightened eyes. Perhaps the open air would dilute their bravado, or, a colder part of her acknowledged, it would simply give them more room to enact their cruelty. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, before she took a single, measured step towards the exit. Bart's smirk widened. He and his men fell in behind her, their heavy footfalls a drumbeat of impending conflict, their malevolent intent as palpable as the summer heat. Outside, the sun beat down on Stoneford's main street, the dust swirling with every gust of wind. The air felt thick, charged. Those townsfolk who had glimpsed the trouble brewing inside Albright's either vanished into doorways or watched from what they hoped was a safe distance, their faces etched with apprehension. Kaya walked with a composed gait, never hurrying, her senses heightened, every nerve ending alight. She heard their crude remarks, the scrape of their boots on the hard-packed earth, just paces behind her. They were steering her, she realized, away from the cluster of buildings, towards the desolate end of town, where the old, abandoned blacksmith's forge stood crumbling near a dense stand of cottonwoods by the creek. A perfect spot for an ambush, they likely thought, or for deeds no one would witness. Bart's voice, raspy and close, ordered her to halt. He was not so fast. He called her a little doe. His hand shot out, fingers like iron bands closing around her upper arm, digging painfully into her flesh. Kaya stopped. She did not struggle, did not pull away. Her body remained a steady and controlled stillness, poised on the knife edge of action. Rufus and Clyde moved to flank her, cutting off any path of retreat, their grins wide and predatory. Bart sneered, his face unpleasantly close, his breath hot and stale. He taunted her, asking if she thought she could simply walk away, assuring her they were not yet finished with her. He gave her arm a brutal shake. His focus returned to her pouch, then his eyes roved over her with a possessive, leering quality as he asked about that, and perhaps anything else she might have that would interest him. Clyde emitted a low, guttural chuckle, remarking to Bart that she was a pretty one, under all that trail dust. Kaya's gaze remained unwavering, fixed not on Bart's leering face, but on a small, almost imperceptible twitch near his eye. It was a sign of his anticipation, his enjoyment of the power he believed he held. She could smell the sour sweat of them, see the grime beneath their fingernails, the raw hunger in their eyes. They perceived her as nothing more than isolated prey, a helpless creature caught in their snare. They had no concept of the years of brutal training that had sculpted her body into a weapon, no idea that the spirit of a hawk, not a doe, burned within her. The sun blazed down, a silent, merciless witness. The only sounds were their vile taunts, the drone of unseen insects, and the powerful, steadied beat of Kaya's heart, a warrior's drum, not a victim's lament. Bart tightened his grip, his knuckles white. His voice dropped to a growl as he gave her a final chance, to hand over the pouch nicely, or they would take it, and more by force. This was the fulcrum, the point where patience ended and retribution began. Bart Higgins, puffed up with his own perceived dominance, yanked savagely at her arm, intending to spin her off balance, to hear her cry out in fear. He did not expect the world to erupt. As his grip became a vice, Kaya moved. It was not a desperate scramble, but a transformation, a shift of mass and intent so swift, so economical it defied belief. One instant, she was the image of terrorized submission. The next, she was a conduit of pure, focused energy. Her free hand, the one that had seemed to rest idly at her side, became a blur. It darted to the small of her back, disappearing for a heartbeat. When it reappeared, it was not clutching the beaded pouch they so greedily desired. It held death. The afternoon sun flashed off the polished, razor-sharp crescent of a tomahawk, its dark, fire-hardened handle seeming to meld with her grip, an extension of her very will. The mask of feigned fear, the carefully constructed illusion of helplessness, shattered. In its place was an expression of such concentrated ferocity, such ancient, primal power, that Bart Higgins instinctively recoiled, his brutal grip faltering for a crucial second. His eyes, suddenly wide with a dawning, horrifying comprehension, locked onto the weapon that had materialized from nowhere. He stammered a disbelieving oath, his voice cracking, his bravado evaporating like a puddle in the desert sun. Rufus and Clyde, who had been closing in with lewd smirks, froze mid-step, their faces, moments before alight with cruel anticipation, contorted with shock and a sudden, sickening fear. The very air around them seemed to crackle with unseen energy. The slight, timid girl was gone. In her stead stood something elemental and terrifying, a warrior spirit, raw and untamed. Kaya uttered no war cry, no threat. Her stance, the lethal grace with which she held the tomahawk, the inferno blazing in her eyes, these spoke a language far more eloquent and chilling than any words. The wind, moments before a gentle sigh, seemed to rise in concert with her spirit, whipping dust into small eddies at her feet, making her buckskin dress snap and swirl like a battle flag. The hunters had become the hunted. The outlaws had prodded a sleeping viper, and now its fangs were bared. The helpless girl was a myth they had fatally embraced. The ensuing conflict was not a desperate struggle. It was a terrifying ballet of destruction. Bart, his shock momentarily overcome by rage, roared an incoherent curse and clawed for his cold peacemaker. He screamed her a witch, but the accusation was choked off mid-syllable. Kaya moved with the blinding speed of a stooping hawk. Before his fingers could even brush the worn leather of his holster, the heavy pommel of her tomahawk smashed into his exposed wrist. A wet, snapping sound cut through the air. Bart shrieked, a thin, piercing wail of agony and utter disbelief, his pistol tumbling from nerveless fingers to land silently in the thick dust. Kaya did not pause, did not hesitate. She was a river in flood, a force of nature. Rufus, his face a mask of terror, fumbled desperately for the smaller pistol tucked into his waistband, his movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Kaya spun, the tomahawk a gleaming, silver arc, not its lethal blade, but the flat of its head connected with Rufus's temple with a sickening, hollow thud. His eyes glazed over, rolling back until only the white showed, and he collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, unconscious before his body hit the unforgiving ground. Clyde, the hulking brute, finally lumbered into action. He let out a furious bellow, a sound of pure animal rage, and charged headlong, his massive arms outstretched, intending to crush her in a bare hug. He was all unthinking force, no skill, no strategy. Kaya sidestepped his clumsy, telegraphed rush with an almost disdainful fluidity, allowing his own momentum to betray him. As he thundered past, off balance and exposed, She brought the hardened hickory handle of her tomahawk down with pinpoint accuracy on the vulnerable juncture of his thick neck and skull. Clyde emitted a strangled grunt, his forward motion abruptly ceasing, as if he'd run into an invisible wall. He pitched forward, his face plowing into the dirt, stunned, gasping for air, stars exploding behind his eyes. It had taken less time than it takes to draw a deep breath. 3 armed, dangerous outlaws, men who had sown fear and reaped misery across the territory, lay broken and defeated at the hands of a single young woman they had fatally underestimated. Kaya stood above them, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths, the battle rage slowly receding, leaving behind a cold, clear focus. Her dark eyes, still holding the embers of the inferno, assessed each fallen adversary. Bart writhed on the ground, clutching his shattered wrist, his face a grotesque mask of pain, shock, and a dawning, horrified respect. Rufus was a still, silent heap. Clyde was feebly trying to push himself up, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes wide with a terror he had likely never experienced before. From the edge of Stoneford, a cluster of townsfolk had gathered, drawn by the raw sounds of violence. Mr. Albright was there, his mouth hanging open, his eyes reflecting a mixture of terror and profound disbelief. They had witnessed an impossibility. They had seen the lethal, hidden truth of Kaya. She paid them no mind. Her attention remained fixed on the outlaws. Calmly, she stepped over to Bart and retrieved his fallen colt, expertly checking its action before tucking it securely into her own belt. She then moved to the unconscious Rufus and relieved him of his smaller pistol. Clyde, managing to push himself to his knees, looked up at her, his broad face pale, his eyes pleading. Kaya met his gaze, her expression unreadable, a calm mask over the warrior spirit. Then she did something that further bewildered the onlookers. She reached into her own beaded pouch, the very object that had instigated this confrontation, and drew out a single, dark hawk feather. She walked to Bart, who cringed away from her approach. Kneeling beside him, she carefully tucked the feather into the band of his hat, which lay in the dust. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet, yet it carried the weight of mountains. This, she told him, was a warning. From the Sky Whisper people. They sought peace, she explained, but they were not without defenders. She advised him, and by extension all who might hear, not to mistake their quiet ways for weakness ever again. She rose, her gaze sweeping over the 3 defeated men. The wind sighed through the nearby cottonwoods, carrying her words and an undeniable chill towards the stunned citizens of Stoneford. Kaya cast one final, appraising look at the men who had so grievously erred. Bart was moaning, his face a ruin of pain and shattered arrogance. Clyde remained on his hands and knees, shaking his head as if trying to dislodge the memory of her terrifying speed. Rufus lay still. She had chosen not to take their lives, though the skill and opportunity had been hers. Her purpose was fulfilled, the threat neutralized, the message delivered. Unnecessary bloodshed was not the path of her ancestors, unless all other avenues were closed. She adjusted the newly acquired pistols at her belt, then stooped to pick up her small bundle of trade goods, which had been dropped when Bart first grabbed her. With a final, almost dismissive glance at the outlaws and the silent, awestruck crowd at the edge of town, Kaya turned. She did not walk back towards the false safety of Stoneford's buildings. Instead, she faced east, towards the distant, blue-hazed mountains that guarded the lands of her people. Her stride was even, unhurried, yet imbued with an undeniable power and dignity that seemed to add inches to her stature, transforming her from a slight girl into a figure of mythic strength. Slowly, hesitantly, Mr. Albright and a few of the braver townsfolk approached the scene of the swift, brutal reckoning. They found the notorious outlaws whimpering, broken, and utterly stripped of their menace. The tale of the quiet native girl who had single-handedly dismantled Bart Higgins' feared gang would sweep through Stoneford, and then the surrounding territories, like a prairie fire. Each telling would add another layer of awe, another detail of her impossible skill, until the story of Kaya became a whispered legend, a warning against arrogance and a testament to hidden strength. The town, humbled and electrified, would never again look upon a lone traveler, especially a native woman, with the same casual disdain. Bart Higgins and his cronies, once their wounds were crudely bound, found themselves unceremoniously escorted out of Stoneford by a newly invigorated town council. The local sheriff, suddenly discovering a spine he hadn't known he possessed. They vanished from that part of the country. Their reign of petty terror decisively ended. Kaya, meanwhile, walked on, the dust of Stoneford settling behind her. The vital salts and metal tools were safe. She now carried 2 additional pistols, and a story that would be recounted around the fires of the Sky Whisper people for many seasons to come. A vivid reminder that the fiercest spirit can reside in the quietest heart, and that the true measure of a warrior is not in the boast, but in the deed. The frontier had witnessed a moment of pure, unadulterated justice, delivered not by a lawman's bullet, but by the ancestral fury of a girl named Kaya.